And there we are. So that'll be letting us know. I'm just going to talk to the Facebook groups for a minute as we get settled here. So hey, everyone. Hey, revolutionaries. It's been a long time since I've seen you all. We are doing the Circle Maker Summer Academy today. It's August 27th. And we have a breakout session that's all about differentiating in early childhood education. So we thought that we would go live on Facebook so more folks could join us. And I have several revolutionaries here live with me in Zoom, and they may have questions that I'll be attending to and answering. You can also post in the Facebook comments if you have a question. I'll do my best to come back and forth and answer them. So we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. So hang tight, and we'll be talking about how to differentiate in preschool and early elementary. All right, I have so many things open. Hopefully I can do this. So my team here live with me in Zoom, if we're ready to get started, I can very easily get into my teacher hat, which I just love to talk at you. So at any point, if you're like, this isn't a match, remember, you can go join another Zoom room or check Inclusive Schooling on Facebook. Julie's broadcasting live as well. I am this session is not being recorded because it's being recorded on Facebook. And so I will get it one way or the other to your dashboard. Okay, Summer Academy folks. And so interrupt me by posting in the Facebook comments or in the Zoom chat, anything that you'd like me to do differently or to share or shape and so forth. So I'm going to share my screen and get over here to our little PowerPoint and make sure that we are ready to dive into what does differentiation look like in the early years. So my examples will be early developmental skills, but really this practice applies across age levels. And so to ground us as we get started, I just want folks to think about what this invitation or this challenge says. It says that our challenge as early educators, as revolutionaries, is to put children's well-being before the content. And so we're going to dive into lots of lesson plans and how do we teach multiple things in the same activity. And sometimes we can get caught up in the standards, in the outcomes, and certainly in IEP goals. And so I just want this to be our grounding mantra that really, as we do lesson design and as we think about differentiating for children, it's really that our goal is to put their well-being before covering the content. And so for any of you who are itinerant, where you will be doing what we often call pushing in, I'm going to pause for a minute and give you a reframe. So we're going to talk about what this looks like, and then I'll pause and reframe what it means to push in. So this is a really complicated visual. If you can see it, you might be like, oh, I thought we were doing early childhood. Yep, early childhood is more complicated than older grades like to give us credit for. And so this is one way that I show building principals, directors of special ed, preschool coordinators, coaches. This is one way I show people what play looks like in early childhood. What does quality instruction look like? What does tiered instruction look like? What does differentiated instruction? So I tend to use quality, tiered, and differentiated almost as synonyms. And I'm purposely using the triangle because so many of you do multi-tiered systems of support. You're used to a triangle. Some of you might be used to squares. Sometimes we use different shapes to depict it. But let me break it down. Then we're going to pause and I'm going to check for what landed on you and why I don't use push in or pull out. Both of them just sound hard. And so I want this to be much more play and embedded and or how we plan. So in a ideal world, when we differentiate, we would not have tiers or layers. So Julie and I talk a lot about losing labels. I would also say, let's lose the layers or lose the tiers, because what we do is we sort and separate learners by tier. So who's ready to learn a common outcome? Who's struggling? And who needs maybe an individualized education plan? I like to argue every child is a triangle, meaning it depends on the circumstances, the situation, the activity, the day, in terms of how much support I might need as a learner. So we have a couple of acronyms down here in the bottom tier, which if we do this really spectacularly, we don't need the other tiers. And I'll explain that too. So TS Gold is Teaching Strategies Gold. AEPS is the Assessment, Evaluation, and Programming System. In early childhood, in preschool in particular, we have curriculum-based assessments that often give us scope and sequence. You have milestones, you have state standards, and you certainly have IEP goals. But IEP goals have to be up here somewhere. We cannot restate the general curriculum as an IEP goal. So part of our quandary as we try to embed or push in special education into kindergarten or into first grade is we need to understand what are the expectations for all kinders, all first graders, all 3-year-olds. And we have to make sure that those standards are culturally responsive, are not harmful, that they have been decolonized, that they are culturally, linguistically, and individually relevant, and that they are just right for those kids. So the first barrier to being able to do specially designed instruction in the gen ed classroom is if we are working with standards that are developmentally inappropriate, culturally insensitive or harmful, or irrelevant to the learner. So that's a big challenge right there out of the gate, is to examine the standards and expectations for children at that grade or age level. All learners will go from earlier to later or easier to harder. So whether we're learning to do letter identification or count to 100 or to resolve conflicts, doesn't matter. All learners, because they're young, will need support, will prefer to do things that are easier or earlier. And so what we do with this purple line and this red line is we vary the complexity of the outcome, and we vary the amount of support for all learners. And so when we do itinerant, or we're embedding specially designed instruction into preschool or into early elementary, our job is often to look at the activity and go, do we have earlier things being offered? Do we have more or less support being offered? So before we even think about pulling a child over or aside, we make sure that we have this very rich foundation. So let me stop my screen for a minute. Let me pause. I'm going to ask my colleagues here in Zoom to use the chat or unmute yourself if you feel comfortable. And any colleagues watching live on Facebook, what comes to your mind when you looked at that triangle and when I said every child is a triangle? What came to your mind, or what's coming to your mind that all children will have a different amount of need for support or readiness? That's one question. Every child's a triangle. What does that mean? The second is, do you have a good understanding of what 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds are learning? And if those are standards based upon your state standards, have we done the work to make sure that they've been decolonized, that they aren't causing harm, that they are culturally relevant, that they are developmentally appropriate, those sorts of things. So I'm going to pause and let you chew on it and comment. So unmute if you can here in Zoom, or type away just something like, okay, like even give me a thumbs up. Like, I'm not sure I get it all, but I'm kind of with you. Same thing in Facebook Live. You can drop in the comments a restatement, a wondering. Yeah. So Jen, I'm going to share your comment. This idea that all kids are going to need support, different activities, different days, different times in their life. So they're all triangles. They're all going to be ready for the common outcomes. They're all going to need some scaffolding and support, and they all might need an individualized plan, to be quite honest. Yep, they come in all shapes and sizes. And so, Cheryl, I'm going to take what you said, and I'm going to say what many special educators tell me is they take that triangle we were looking at and they actually turn it upside down. And they go, most of the kids I serve have IEPs, if not all of them. So I actually have an inverted triangle. I'm actually trying to figure out what to do for all kids that have individualized needs. And so that brings me to why I don't really use push in. Push in is almost like square peg in round hole. It's a push, it's an effort. I like embed, or I like tiered instruction, or I like blended practices, or I like every child is a triangle, or just plain old support, meaning that we are offering support. So when Cheryl, when you visit Jen's classroom, I want the learners to see you as just another co-teacher who's there to offer me support if I need it, versus, oh, she's here for that kid, or, oh, she does something special over on the other side of the room with that group of kids. It's really this seamless, all adults in this environment can offer support to anyone. So it's just a preference of mine. It's nothing scientific. It just as a mindset that says, I'm another human that's here to make sure you thrive, versus I'm here to push in your specially designed instruction so you get your minutes today, Miss 5-year-old, right? It just is a different way of our thinking. And then as a gen ed teacher, I know I can rely on your brain and your hands and your creativity for anything that I might be struggling with as an educator, versus just the things that might be written on an IEP. Okay, so that's the first chunk. So for my folks that are here with me in Zoom, if this feels like, okay, this is going to help me, stay put. If you feel like, I'm going to go check out one of the other breakout rooms, totally fine. If anybody's with me on Facebook Live, I'm going to go deeper into how do we sort the outcomes for learners in the same activity. So you're one adult and you have many children, and now you're like, okay, now they're all running around like little triangles, but I'm still just one adult. Even when I have push-in services, embedded services, itinerant services, they aren't with me all day. So how do I meet the needs of all these little triangles? Now, before we go there, be thinking about, I'm still back on what should all 5-year-olds be learning. Some of us come to early childhood. We've been either on maternity leave, maybe we had a different career for a while, maybe we actually were teaching third graders, and now we've decided to come to kindergarten. Or maybe our calling has always been to work with 3, 4s, and 5-year-olds, and that opening came available in our school district. We may need to spend some time really understanding human development and what is developmentally appropriate. For those of us who are white, we may not understand the colonization and the harm that our state standards are causing the students who are Black, Indigenous, or of color. For those of us who speak English as our primary language, we may not understand the bias embedded in the standards that expect English proficiency, both spoken and in reading. So our job at this point might need to make a note, I need to go back and learn what is developmentally appropriate for the age group I'm serving this year, or age band that I'm serving this year, regardless of grade. And I may need to work on decolonizing the standards that are adopted by my state. So Missy, my friend Missy is joining us on Facebook. I will gather a few things to help those of you. I'm going to call upon my friend Ijuma Jordan, and we'll put a couple things together about how you can critique your state standards to see, and then how would you take step to decolonize. The first thing is always to understand that they were probably written by people with power and privilege, and that acknowledgement is the first place to go. The second is to work in community. Make sure that you have family members and educators who are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and of color, that take a look at those standards with you from a critical race theory perspective, and or just a culturally responsive. So those would be my two first out of the gate. Awareness, as Missy and I are both white as our race, awareness that the standards do come from a white dominant culture. Even if people on the committee were BIPOC, we all live in a white dominant culture. Doesn't mean white majority. That means white is dominant or superior, consciously or unconsciously. And then secondly, come together in a small community or big community. Find a co-teacher, find a parent, find a consultant like Ijuma Jordan, who will help you look at and re-look at the standards from a culturally responsive perspective. Sometimes even using a universal design for learning lens will strip the colonization. So universal design for learning will say that kids can say it, sign it, dance it, draw it. That even allows for decolonization of the priority of the spoken word and or writing in English. Okay, so that's a lot. So any questions, put them in the chat here in Zoom, or put them in Facebook about any of the things I've talked about for a minute. Every child is a triangle. And this idea of, do I understand what is the outcome for all learners? And I'll pause and I'll start sharing my screen again. Knowing that you can stay here absolutely with me. You can join another Zoom room or another Facebook Live as it meets your needs today. Here we go. Okay, so this is what it means to, let's see if it'll start where I want it to. Yes, okay. This is preschool, early elementary, tiered instruction, differentiated instruction, quality instruction. I use those as synonyms. And so all children are learning the common outcomes. So Missy and I have an amazing colleague, Marcia from Colorado Department of Ed, and she will often say, okay, as you go up the tiers, you're actually layering. And she uses an analogy of painting. So the common outcomes are like the primer, maybe even just the wood. Let's go with this, just the wood that you're going to build something. Then in the middle, you're going to put primer. And then on the third, you're going to put a coat of paint. This is also this idea of embedding or layering or adding versus I'm going to take the individualized and do it over here. And or that this kid needs temporary support. It's the same kid. They have a wood foundation. They're going to need primer sometimes, and then they're going to need different colors. And so what we do to help us really think about it is we're going to differentiate the outcomes. We're going to differentiate how often we teach, and we're going to differentiate the level of precision our instruction. So this is a new way of thinking of differentiation. And in our afternoon session, which will also be recorded and on Facebook Live, we're going to get into frequency and precision. This morning session that's going to go until 12:30 Eastern time is just about differentiating outcomes, if you can believe it. Okay, so here we go. In my work with Jennifer Grisham and Mary Louise Hemmeter in blended practices, we talk about 3 types of outcomes. So Cheryl, this is the thing I'd love for you and Jen to really get into ease, tip of your tongue conversation. Instead of thinking about IEP goals, or thinking about which kids are struggling with reading, or thinking about who needs which support, I would love for you guys to start with what before how. What are you teaching? So if there is an activity, let's say you are doing even an activity like circle time or morning meeting, I would love for people to sit down and talk about what are the outcomes for morning meeting. Even take snack or transition or your reading curriculum activity. And I understand what the publishers might say you are teaching, and I understand what standards you might be addressing by working on segmenting or blending or phonological awareness or rhyming. But before you get into all of that, I would love you as an individual interventionist or teacher, or if you have a co-teacher, just talk about it and lay them out. Dump it out, do a brain dump. What are all the things kids are learning? Well, they're learning to cooperate. They're learning to have self-regulation. They're learning how to rhyme. They're learning how to do one-to-one correspondence. Get it all out. And then you're going to do this thing called sorting. You're going to actually sort your outcomes as to whether they are common, targeted, or individualized. So I'm going to give you definitions of each, and you're going to sort it literally on a triangle. Helps, because then you can see, are we heavy in individualized outcomes? Are we heavy in common outcomes that no 5-year-old could possibly learn all those things in this activity? So common outcomes. These come again from state standards. If you're a Head Start provider, you not only have state standards, but you have Head Start outcomes. If you are working in a preschool that is serving children 3, 4s, and 5s that have an IEP, you are also accountable to OSEP outcomes. These are 3 federal outcomes. Many of you may be doing the Common Core, and I'm going to share a thing called Big Ideas. So it's like, whew, again, I thought this was early childhood. How can it be so complicated? Well, oftentimes people don't understand building principles. Directors of special ed may not understand when you have multiple funding streams in preschool in particular, that means you have multiple common outcomes. Kindergartners are tough because not all kindergartners went to preschool. Some kindergartners are fixing to already go to 1st grade. So you have this incredible span day 1 of kindergarten. And so you might need to look at what are some state standards for pre-K that I need to build into kindergarten, because my kinders have had no experience with group settings, with reading, with early math. So you might need to go down. And because you've had kids who have been to preschool, maybe even were in a developmental pre-K, they're really reading. They're already off the charts. You might need to look up to 1st grade to really understand the scope and sequence. My preference is to really look at big ideas. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 big outcomes, phonological awareness and segmenting and blending. And once you've done that brain dump, and you've gone, oh my gosh, this is all the stuff we're teaching at morning meeting, or all the stuff we're teaching at the writing center, or all the stuff we're teaching at circle time. You really have to define it, because we will say things like, oh, I'm working on phonological awareness standards. But look at this definition. If you can see my screen, this is what, at a minimum, phonological awareness often encompasses. If you look at the reading or the literacy research, awareness of speech sounds, such as rhyming, alliterations, and the number of words in a sentence, and the syllables within words. Holy cannoli, even rhyming, you're going to go, but Christy, I'm teaching kindergarten, and I look at my reading curriculum, and there's nothing that comes before, and my kids aren't ready to rhyme. Phonological awareness also has things that are more advanced, that are like onset rhyme awareness and full phonemic awareness. And you're like, but wait, I don't even have kids that are doing speech as the way they communicate. and they're here in my class. Now you can start to see why there's resistance to inclusion, because the curriculum, the standard, starts us off here, and our kids are everywhere around it. So we go, fine, that's the phonological awareness it is. Do we have common understanding of it? Let's take segmenting and blending. People sometimes think segmenting and blending is a literacy skill. I'm going to argue it's more than that. Segmenting and blending, at the core of it, is the ability to separate, split up, or disassemble. That's segmenting. And blending, oh, that's being able to put pieces and parts together, combine them, mix them, assemble them. This is not, friends, just about letter sounds or phonemes. This is about puzzles. This is about painting. This is about taking your lunch out of your lunchbox. This is everything we do across the daily routine is segmenting and blending. So once we have a common understanding, now I can go to my special educator and say, I'm working on segmenting and blending from when they get off the bus till they get back on the bus. And I have kids who are struggling. Help me figure out how I can differentiate an activity for different levels of ability around segmenting and blending. And that's what I'm going to show you today, is how do I differentiate phonological awareness and how do I differentiate segmenting and blending. Any comments, questions? We're going to take another minute to let you process because I'm doing a lot of talking at you. Questions or comments about understanding the big idea and then sorting it and defining it. Oh, Dina. We have definitions of all these big ideas. We have activities that will help you sort and separate big ideas. Questions or comments from my Facebook colleagues and or here in Zoom. Anything you need me to say again, say differently. I'm pausing on purpose. It's hard, so I'm going to keep pausing. And we're going to look at the big ideas together for a minute. And these will be on your Summer Academy dashboard. All right. So big ideas for early learning. This is actually a work that I've done with some colleagues here in Ohio, Sarah Jackson and Susan Corey Herco, Teresa Brown, and Michelle Smith. And so my friend Dana from Nevada, who's on Facebook, she was commenting that she loves these. We love them too. You'll see there are several big ideas. Segmenting and blending was the one I showed and shared. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what it looks like in this glossary. So I'm going to scroll down to the green area. So bear with me here if you're watching on my screen. I'm going down to segmenting and blending to show you how this would look. And again, this is just getting really clear on what the common outcome is before I try to differentiate my instruction for children who are struggling or children who have individualized outcomes. We as a teaching team need to be super clear on what the common outcome is and that it's decolonized so that it's culturally, linguistically, and individually relevant, therefore developmentally appropriate. Sometimes people go, oh, I don't want to hear you say developmentally appropriate one more time. That's just a scapegoat for doing rigor. Okay, let's back up. What is rigor and why are we prioritizing rigor with 5-year-olds? That's my first question. Second of all, why do we think being developmentally appropriate, being able to match the learner where they are, is a bad thing? And then the third thing is, have we really looked at being able to do rigor, meaning purposeful, intentional, supportive throughout the day? So here's that definition of segmenting and blending. And here are all kinds of ways that learners can show me. Remember, our definition of differentiation is, how do you show me? What's the product? How do you show me what you know? Well, some kids may separate sounds or syllables. Some kids may distribute larger sets of objects into smaller sets. Some kids might combine red and blue paint to make purple. Some kids might mix. So those verbs are what Carol Ann would say is how we differentiate by product. So sometimes we think, oh, this kid, they don't know whatever the standard is, because the only way we've allowed them to show us is through verbal expression. But if they can type it, point to it, sort it, do it in a motoric way, we actually see that they know and have the concept of segmenting and blending. So the big ideas are our way of getting some agreement between us about what we're teaching before we worry about this child might be struggling or we need specially designed instruction. And again, Cheryl and others who are special educators and are embedding into the gen ed classroom or co-teaching with a gen ed classroom teacher, this is where we start to have conversation about how do we tier this activity so children have multiple access points, different ways to show us that they know segmenting and blending. Now, might eventually they need to show it with syllables and sounds? Yes, but first we want to make sure that they even understand and can do segmenting and blending in multiple ways, in a variety of ways. Because guess what? This kid who's deaf with a capital D, or this kid who's going to type to communicate, may never rhyme through spoken English. And that's okay. They can still be in AP English language arts 20 years from now, well, 10 years from now. But if we stay stuck and say, wow, until you have this foundational skill, I can't include you in first grade because you don't yet do rhyming. That kid will never be able to move along, but they have the early things around segmenting and blending, same and different. Okay. All right. We've been going for a half an hour. This is the first part of differentiating in the early years. We're thinking about every child as a triangle. We're thinking about, are we making sure that our expectations, our outcomes, our curriculum is developmentally appropriate, culturally responsive? So we always often say culturally, linguistically, and individually appropriate. If not, we don't get to go forward. Second thing, we go, okay, what are we teaching? Common outcomes, targeted outcomes, and individualized, and can we sort them? And so we said, well, let's understand what common outcomes are. Well, common outcomes are these things that I expect all learners to have, all learners to be exposed to, not proficient at, but all kids are being exposed to them. And these usually come from state standards, Head Start, OSEP, and I introduced the big ideas. So then we go, okay, well, we got to define it, because what is it? And so we say, well, do we have a definition of phonological awareness? Do we have a definition of segmenting and blending? Once we do, we go, okay, that outcome that we're working on at circle time, at morning meeting, during small group reading instruction, that we are clear that's what we're teaching. Now we can start to say, based upon our data, we've noticed that some of our kids are struggling. Some of our kids aren't yet ready for that common outcome. Some kids have stalled. Okay, so now we're in that messy middle. We're in that middle tier. Some people call it tier 2. We're going to talk about it as the messy middle. All learners are kind of messy sometimes. Remember, every kid's a triangle. So how do I figure out what will get you unstuck? How do I differentiate the teaching and the supports I provide? So what you see here is a list of differentiation or supports we can provide. One, I can take a big skill like phonological awareness, and I can break it into its components and go, whew, I was teaching too many things at the same time. Let's work on one component during this activity and another component another time. That might make sense. Second thing, I can go, oh, you know what? To be able to do phonological awareness, you also have to know same and different. You also have to have some self-regulation skills. You also have to have comprehension. You also have to have, and you're like, oh, I need to strengthen the concurrent skills before I keep pushing for phonological awareness. Maybe the kid uses it in some settings, but not all settings. So they're really good when they work with you in a small group, but when they're in a large group, it's too hard for them to process and they don't show you what they know. And so this goes through multiple decisions, and on your dashboard, for those of you who are here in the academy with us, there's recordings about all of this. So if you're like, I need to understand the messy middle deeper, just know that there are recordings, handouts, podcasts that will help you understand the messy middle more deeply. But let's look at a couple of examples. Remember, we said our common outcome is phonological awareness, and we're going to channel our good friend Marcia, and we're going to say on top of that, we're going to layer some instruction that really dives into the component of rhyming. That's what several of my 5-year-olds are struggling with. And even though my curriculum is moving on to phonological awareness, I know that my activities have to include both the bigger picture of phonological and specific opportunities to work more on rhyming, not just rhyming. I don't pull you out of the triangle into a separate room or separate space and the hallway and work on rhyming longer and louder. I bring more rhyming into our day. So when we transition, we rhyme. When we hang up our coats, we rhyme. When we eat our snack, we rhyme, because we're increasing the frequency that some kids who are struggling with rhyming can see it in their natural habitat. For segmenting and blending, we might be in that messy middle and we might say, okay, maybe I'm going to support kids in being able to segment and blend the number of things, or they can do it verbally and non-verbally. That makes it harder, because before they were doing everything non-verbally when they segmented and blended. And now I'm going to up the ante and they have to do it verbally. Maybe I need to look sideways again. You're going to see that come up a lot. What's happening concurrently? Oh, compare and contrast, same and different. That will help me with blending. Or maybe the child has an articulation issue that I can't hear the sounds that they're making. Or maybe they struggle with being able to be self-regulated, which is not impulse control. Self-regulation is the managing of energy and tension. So maybe I've got to work on interactions or attention or focus or problem solving. And so I work on something related. So this becomes such a deep conversation that if any of you have flipped your lids now and you're like, we don't have time to do this. Yeah, this is the challenge, y'all. That this is the layering of understanding of our learners we have when we plan lessons. It's fun to think about the materials. It's fun to think about, the grouping. It's fun to think about choices, all those great things we've been talking about. But I will always argue it's what before how. Before we are clear on what we are teaching and that we've really defined that, and we know who is on track and who is struggling, we can throw all the interesting Pinterest ideas we want at the activity or the lesson, and the children will still struggle because we haven't spent enough time differentiating or tiering the what. We just tier who teaches it, where they teach it, how they teach it, and how often. And I'm saying, hold on all of that and first differentiate what you're teaching. So let me pause. Questions, comments? Disagreements, wonderings? We have a question in Facebook and Barban. Yeah, I'll put a couple of things in after the recording. I'll put some of these slides and or give you places you can go as well, even if you're not part of the Summer Circle Makers Academy, because they're just on my website for free. Kamika or Nicole or Cheryl or Jen, anything that I can say differently or expand upon, or anything you want to unmute and say is okay too. And if you're okay, you can do a thumbs up or just chat, say, it's okay, like good enough. Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Kamika. Hey, Charmaine, when you say DI and UDL, do you mean differentiated instruction, not direct instruction? Thanks, Jen. Yeah. So, Charmaine, people will have different answers. So Charmaine is a good colleague of ours, and she's asking about the differences between differentiated instruction and universal design for learning. This is my opinion. I tend to clump them. I clump three things, actually: quality instruction, differentiated instruction, and tiered instruction. Now, UDL for me is usually underneath there. Some people like UDL to be the bigger umbrella. I kind of like the bigger umbrella to be three things: quality instruction, tiered instruction, and differentiated instruction. And then universal design, where I do multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of engagement, are some of my go-tos underneath there. And then I use Carol Ann's definition of process, product, and content, which is very similar to UDL, but they seem a little bit lower to me. So I like to be tiered instruction, differentiated instruction, quality instruction as synonyms, and then universal design, or Carol Ann's definition of differentiated instruction, starts to get a little bit lower. But because I use more than just Carol Ann's definition of differentiated instruction, it's big for me because I'm differentiating the outcomes. So that's a really long answer, Charmaine, that probably didn't say it. But for me, because I differentiate what before how, differentiated instruction is bigger. And then UDL fits under it, and Carol Ann's definition of DI falls under it. Okay. All right, so let's see what else we can build on here, and I will make sure that my Circle Maker Summer Academy colleagues can find everything on your dashboard, and I'll make sure anybody on Facebook has a couple of links that go into some of my PowerPoint and into some of the concepts we've raised around decolonizing standards and every child being a triangle. So we have about 15 minutes more that we're going to close this up by getting to the top tier. Then our Circle Maker Summer Academy folks are going to go into a break, and I'm going to tell them how they can do that. We're going to be back this afternoon talking about how to do lesson design in early childhood that builds upon, now that you know what you're teaching, how do you teach it? Okay, so here we go, sharing my screen. We were at the middle tier. And again, this is like, we have a book on this, Jennifer Grisham and Mary Louise Hemeter. We have a book study on this. We're spending 1 hour. So if you're like, this is blowing my mind, just kind of stay with it, stay with the ideas, take a few key takeaways, knowing there's tons of books, resources, and free things for you. So one of the questions is, what is IEP worthy? Where do IEPs fit into tiered instruction for me? So at that biggest level, in quality instruction, tiered instruction, or differentiated instruction, for me, those are synonyms at the biggest level. IEPs are never at the bottom tier, are never tier 1, are never a restatement. Nor are they always at the top. They are not always something that requires special ed. So I don't see Tier 3 as synonymous with special ed, because special ed services and supports are embedded across tiers in the general ed, in appropriate daily activities. But what I mean by individualized outcomes are when children need us to teach them foundational skills, prerequisite skills, or to remove barriers. Now, a couple of caveats. Prerequisite skills. Yes, there are certain skills kids need before they can do more complicated skills. But we do not teach earlier skills earlier in life because someday you're going to need later skills. We still have to be developmentally appropriate, and that might mean formal instruction around reading should not begin until you're 7, 8, 9. Yes, I just said formal instruction that's very direct, very taught, really benefits children much later. But what we do is say, you have to read by 3rd grade. Let's start formal reading instruction earlier. Now, those school reforms, like the 3rd grade reading guarantee, when you look at it, they're racist, they're ableist, they're sexist, they're genderist, all those things, okay? So we have to be very cautious that our school reform is actually improving outcomes for children, not distracting us from quality instruction and making us accountable for things that are upholding the white dominant culture. So again, be careful with this idea of prerequisites being taught earlier. Also caution about foundational skills. Again, children with disabilities may stay on some foundational skills their whole life, and that's okay. There is no requirement to be in inclusion or to go to the next age or grade level that says you have to pass foundational skills. But sometimes if we stay focused on foundational skills, we don't realize that kids are just going to skip them altogether. And if we differentiate by a different way to communicate, let's say by typing or pointing or signing, now the student can show us very complex representation of skills, but they just can't do it through verbal speech. So these are highly individualized. They are always selected to increase access, participation, and progress in the general curriculum or for preschoolers' appropriate daily activities. Everyone on the team, that always includes the family, is a high priority. It likely that specially designed instruction will need to be delivered, and they're what we call IEP worthy if they're an IEP goal, but that's a whole other conversation. So just focus on the first 4. Highly individualized, customized, personalized, but that highly personalized, specially designed instruction is embedded so that you can access, participate, and make progress in daily activities, the general curriculum with diverse peers. It's a priority for everyone on the team, and it likely requires specially designed instruction. So, Cheryl, this is that graphic that I was saying. Some people feel like they're teaching to an upside down triangle. So let's take phonological awareness. We already defined it. We said it was a common outcome. Then we said next layer. I've got a student or some students or my entire kindergarten class that is struggling with a component of phonological awareness, such as rhyming. Then I get to the 3rd layer and I go, okay, well, what's earlier or easier than rhyming? And you might look at your district's reading curriculum and you're like, I don't know, nothing is there. Then it's a Google search. Then it's a conversation with your reading experts. Then it's a conversation with the early childhood people in your building who are playing down the hall. Say, hey, y'all, what comes before rhyming? And this is a beautiful conversation to have where you unpack rhyming and what the research shows for different ages and abilities and disabilities of how rhyming unfolds culturally, linguistically, and individually. It's fascinating. There's actually a thing called visual rhyming for kids who are deaf. So fascinating to understand how rhyming actually develops culturally, linguistically, and individually. You can also say, what's a foundational skill? What's this kid missing? Well, imitation. It's hard to rhyme if you don't even have a joint attention or imitation skills. And then the top one is my favorite. What stressors can you remove? And we're going to talk about this all day in day 4 of the Summer Academy. And any of you there in Colorado or Idaho or Nevada, where we've hung out a lot about self-regulation and being a stress detective, this is what I mean. This is nothing about the child, nothing about their development. It's all about the learning environment or me and how I'm delivering the activity that's causing too many stressors to allow the child to access, participate, and make progress. So instead of doing anything about the what, I actually reduce the stressors that will allow the child to come back to the green zone, and then they actually can learn phonological awareness back down there at the first level. Same example, segmenting and blending. We said, get my big idea glossary. I understand what segmenting and blending is. My team goes, I've noticed some kids are struggling with a related or concurrent skill of self-regulation. Or I get all the way to the top and I say, yep, what stressors can I remove or reduce? What's easier than segmenting and blending? Or what's a foundational skill that the child may need that will enhance their ability to do segmenting and blending without so much fuss? And so that's how it goes. And we have a whole handout that explains these 3 tiers of what we mean. And then in the second breakout today, we're going to talk about when and where and how to teach in this tiered way or this differentiated way. And then we have a whole handout on how to sort outcomes where you can see tons and tons, I think like 20 examples. I'll leave you with one more example. Oftentimes, especially in early childhood, the common outcome that gets kids removed from the preschool classroom is they cannot participate. They are not engaged. They are not doing things in the activity. So we go, we need to pull you out over a side and teach you how to be in a group. Well, you actually learn how to be in a group by being in a group of kids who are doing all kinds of things. So we first have to define what we mean by participate. You might think everybody has agreement. Nope. So write it down. Talk about it. Okay. Participates means kids can watch what's going on, interact with the materials and people that are going on, can follow directions, can exchange materials back and forth, and can kind of hang out with the group. Whew. Okay. I hope, Jen, my wish for you is that every one of your kids this year can participate. The likelihood is about 0, meaning they're going to be learning how to watch, how to interact, how to follow directions, how to exchange materials, how to remain with the group. Even remain with the group. What do we mean? Near the group or crisscross applesauce hands in the pot, as they say in New York, which is a horrible phrase. Then we go, messy middle. I'm going to unpack what my teaching team means by remains with the group or near the group. I could even blow your mind further this afternoon when we talk about the activity being a choice, meaning I'm going to run circle time and this kid may not want to be in circle, and circle can be a choice to come or not to come. Or mind blown. Then we go all the way up the triangle and we go, some kids are learning to ignore distractions. So in the same activity, the same circle time, the same small group, some kids are learning participation in all its fullness. Some kids are practicing remaining near or with the group, and some kids are working on ignoring distractions. So in the same activity, I tier or differentiate what is being taught, but it's in the same activity and almost invisible to anybody who would be watching. And so that is what differentiation in the early years looks like. And I'll put lots of resources on your dashboard for my Circle Maker Summer Academy folks. And I'll put lots of things in the Facebook live recording. And I'm going to open it up for questions. Circle makers, you all know your schedule. If you want to go, you can leave the Zoom meeting even while I'm talking. It's not rude. I'm going to stop on Facebook Live here in a minute. So if you want to stay and chat just with our group, that's cool too. Let's see if I can do that first. I'll stop the live stream. Thanks to all my revolutionaries who joined me. I'll check your chat and get you links coming up soon.